The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish things that aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears.
Allow me to introduce our American visitors. I must ask you to forgive their somewhat lackadaisical manners, but I have conditioned them, or brainwashed them, which I understand is the new American word.
It is a fact that shitposting and public opinion are now detrimental communists. But really, they're part of the two opposing factions. Which are what? One. Some of them are really wealthy families. Their one thing is to maintain stability, or at least that's what they call it. The other group is Eisenhower's industrial military complex, and they want to maintain instability, so they say.
So you're saying that Group 1 is warring with Group 2?
Yes, at some levels they're at war.
You can't tell me with your accent that me as an American,
I work for the CIA. I am not a spy. I just read books.
Rules of perception. If they're black, then it's a gang. If they're Italian, it's a mob. But if they're Jewish, it's a coincidence, and you should never speak about it.
Yes, sir. You take an ordinary man and turn him into an assassin. That was our goal. Now, MK Ultra was terminated in 1973, but not the research that I continued. Shall I go on?
The truth would set you free.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. If our traditions, with it. Opposed to secret societies. Opposed to secret societies.
People will be reluctant at first to take the mark, but with proper marketing, celebrities, movie stars, sports heroes, they'll soon accept it and then even embrace this new technology.
Mr. President?
Hello.
All right. Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on when you catch the video. This is Living in the Logos. My name is Ryan Tower. As always, I really appreciate you being here. I hope that you're doing well. I'm live right now in southern New Hampshire. It's still pretty hot. I have the air conditioning on, so if you do hear that in the background, I apologize. I think the mic does pretty good with the noise canceling, but just in case. And, well, there's a lot going on. Everybody's still trying to make sense of what's happening with Donald Trump, of course. And, you know, I want to say a couple things to start off with, just in the spirit of good faith, because there are some things that I think that Trump's doing that are good, and there's plenty that are bad, of course. But one of the things that he is doing well, and which I benefit from directly, is his crypto legislation, which was passed in somewhat of a tussle in the House, and he's been able to work in legislation that quite a few people have tried to make happen and have failed to do so. And arguments can be made about whether or not it's going to be good in the long term. I think it's one of those things where I happen to be invested in something that's aligned with the nefarious interests of people like Donald Trump and the folks in his administration. So they're technically going to profit off of the same thing that I am, although for different reasons. But I have to be honest, I am grateful that he's doing that, because it's affording me an opportunity to accumulate a little bit of money that I wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And so in the spirit of transparency and full disclosure, I'm happy about that. I can't lie. And the other thing, the second thing that I wanted to say in the spirit of good faith is that border crossings have been almost stopped completely. The amount has gone down dramatically. It's for argumentative purposes, it's all but stopped. And I think those two things are good. Aside from that, I mean, we've seen a complete catering of the majority of the promises that was made on the campaign trail, from the mass deportations to the Russia and Ukraine war, to the negotiations in the Middle East, bombing Iran, the Epstein files, the JFK files. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And I understand to some degree that we have to be realistic in our analysis about the rhetoric that comes from leaders, or at least I am. I know that I spend a lot of time analyzing the things that Donald Trump says, but I'm only doing that because it represents a window, I think, into the structure of decision making, the structure of decision making that sits beyond and behind and above Donald Trump. And I think that the things that he says are important, not because I believe the rhetoric, but because they represent a position that's being dictated from above. And it's important that we try and make sense of what it is that's happening. And of course, trying to make sense of what Trump has done is pretty difficult. And I can see that, you almost get a sense based on his words that the goal is to create two camps, where you have people who are blindly willing to trust whatever Donald Trump says, and then everybody else. And that's never been a good political strategy. And so oftentimes when this type of campaign is carried out, this type of divisive and just flagrant and blatant disagreeableness towards his own base, which is super, super weird. And really, it's like kind of unparalleled. But to me, it seems pretty clear that there's a lot more behind the presidency than what we've been led to believe. And I mean, I've believed that for a long time, but I think the mainstream public is starting to come to that awareness. And it looks to me like this Epstein issue has been kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. If you look online, on social media, on all the places where people who support Trump talk to each other, I mean, a lot of people are not happy with the way that this has turned out. A lot of people, I think, who have been following this story for quite some time, the evidence that we do have about Epstein, not just his connections to Trump, but just the significance of his presence and the operation in general, is extensive. We have journalists going back 10, 12 years that were covering the story. We know about the plea deal that Jeffrey Epstein got from Alexander Acosta, who ended up taking a major position in Trump's first administration. I mean, these people, they go way back. Donald Trump knew Jeffrey Epstein for a long time. And it's important to recognize a cover-up when you see one. And I recognize as well that it's difficult for people who put a lot of faith in Donald Trump to swallow this kind of pill. And I recognize that for sure. I understand. And even in my own experience, there's been a lot of back and forth with the desire to believe in something optimistic about what it is that President Trump is doing, or the people that are controlling his presidency, what they're doing. And there's something to be said about the appeal of that idea, to say that it's actually just a story that's bigger than we can understand. And so that we might not necessarily be able to see the implications of the decisions that are being made now. The problem with that kind of idea and ideology at large is that it requires you to not necessarily remain complacent in the present, but it requires you to sacrifice your agency in the present in some sense, with the hopes that the person is telling you something that's true about the future. And this isn't the type of ideology that you want to be involved in when it comes to politics, because somebody like Donald Trump specifically has a very clear and decisive track record of being dishonest. And the job at large, generally speaking, the job of presidency if you understand the political system correctly, is not about forwarding the interest or governing the American people in a respectable way. It's actually about taking the agenda of the people that funded your rise to power and marketing that agenda to the American people in a way that keeps them pacified and also distracts them or discourages them from looking in the direction that would reveal the process behind the scenes, right? And so once you see Donald Trump in that light, which I think was difficult to do up until now, it was up until now with the Epstein case that people were still struggling because they wanted to believe, and I understand. And so before we read this Truth Social post, this is a doozy of a statement. I mean, the element of Donald Trump having his own social media enterprise and having a place where he can communicate directly with the American people it's a funny thing kind of as a president to see that. And I think a lot of the more stubborn and snobby people in politics see that as a negative. I honestly think it's great. And I think every president should take advantage of it. I do believe that if you're going to be president of a country, that people should have direct access to your thoughts if they'd like to. And as much as Trump takes advantage of the system and obviously doesn't necessarily use it in a way that's always respectable or even useful to the conversation, I think that it is a good idea. Anyways, so before we read this, what I wanted to say is, in order to understand how the Trump phenomenon fits kind of into the context of our present situation, you have to think a little bit about what led to Trump being what he is. And I'm not going to relitigate the entire history of his past and what he was involved in. But I just mean in terms of the political discourse, because when Trump came onto the scene in 2015, it was at the tail end of 8 years of a very liberal government that I think that there's a growing movement that starts during the Obama administration, which begins on the right wing. And that same movement has kind of culminated, not necessarily finished, but at this moment is kind of culminated in what would be loosely termed the MAGA movement. But my point in saying that is that Trump, when he came onto the scene, he didn't create that movement or the energy that movement represented at the time. He was just smart enough to pander to a very specific political ideology that was becoming popular at the time, and which since then has increasingly become more popular. And that would be, something along the lines of a traditionalist, kind of implicitly Christian, pro-white, pro-American, America first. These are the terms that kind of describe what was going on. And it had some phases, with the Tea Party and things like that. So, but this same sentiment has been present for a long time. And Donald Trump was creative enough to capture that energy and to pander to it. Like I said, I don't believe Donald Trump is really a nationalist. I don't think that he's even pro-white. I don't believe that he's really race conscious at all. I actually think he's pretty much a classical neocon, and the way that he governs is just like any other neocon. The only difference is that we've been getting a hyper rhetoric, and that's not by accident. It's because Trump knows that the people in his base are looking for certain things from him. They're looking to him to fulfill a certain idea about the future. And when Trump doesn't fulfill that idea about the future, he has to lie. And when he lies, he does it very well because it's sensational, and he's good at redirecting energy towards other things. He's good at making the attention fall on other people and their faults. But at the same time, it's very clear, it seems, what the policy was in his stepping into this energy. They knew what they were doing. They capitalized on it. But what's interesting about that is the energy doesn't go away once Trump is gone. And I titled this episode today, The Death of MAGA, because I do believe this, what we're seeing now, this sort of tiff that's growing in the MAGA movement, where the base itself is actually turning against Donald Trump over the Epstein issue. I think in a few years, we'll look back on this moment as the beginning of a coming to reality for the right wing, a recognition that Trump really is going to be obedient to the donors and not to the people of America. And it's going to be a bittersweet pill to swallow. And these are the types of situations that can lead to dangerous political movements once somebody like Donald Trump steps out of the scene and all of the vitriol and the energy that was projected into his presidency still exists, right? So people still want the things that they wanted before Donald Trump was elected into the political arena. They still want mass deportations. They still want less wars. They still want sound money. That, you know what I mean? So those desires don't go away just because Donald Trump does. And in some sense, I believe that Donald Trump was always meant to be a first step of a process that leads to something, I think, much more right wing, something that will make Donald Trump look very centrist compared to what that will be. But let's take a look. Understanding the discourse and how the zeitgeist works, you have to remember that Donald Trump is pandering to this crowd. He's lying to it. He's faking it. And he's also taking money from Israel and Silicon Valley and all these other people at the same time. And some of the promises that he made, like the promises about the Epstein files, were very dear to the hearts of his followers. You know, people were willing to really go to the bat for Donald Trump because they really believed in the optimism and the rhetoric, which it was easy to fall for. You know, to be fair, for people who care about America, it's easy to be caught up in the energy and the sentiment of an idea that's very powerful. And especially when somebody like Donald Trump, who appeared at the time to be outside of the political arena, it was a really well-run campaign in the sense that the marketing worked. It landed. The people who were involved in the first campaign, who had their finger on the pulse of the right wing, they were very aware of what was going on 4chan. They were very aware of the rising kind of racial awareness and sentiment that was developing on social media, and they played to it, and it was very successful. But now the problem is that you make all these promises. You have to promise these people a lot because they're really looking for solutions. And so Trump goes out on the campaign trail and he says, we're going to stop the war in 24 hours, you know, no more wars. We're going to have no inflation. We're going to have full employment. You know, he goes out and he says all these things. And at some point, people realize that they're not going to get those things. And so far, it's taken about 6 or 7 months. But the Epstein case has been one that I think has really driven a wedge between the people in the base and Donald Trump. So let's take a look at this Truth Social post. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what I think this has to do with Epstein and what that means for Israel and why those things are related. So this is a real doozy. So listen to this. This is Donald Trump. The radical left Democrats have hit pay dirt again, just like with the fake and fully discredited Steele dossier, the lying 51 intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, which the Dems swore had come from Russia. No, it came from Hunter Biden's bathroom. And even the Russia scam itself, a totally fake and made-up story used in order to hide crooked Hillary Clinton's big loss in the 2016 presidential election. These scams and hoaxes are all the Democrats are good at. It's all they have. They are no good at governing, no good at policy, and no good at picking winning candidates. Also, unlike Republicans, they stick together like glue. Their new scam is what we will forever call the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And my past supporters, he put past in all caps, have bought into this bullshit, hook, line, and sinker. They haven't learned their lesson and probably never will, even after being conned by the lunatic left for 8 long years. I've had more success in 6 months than perhaps any president in our country's history. And all these people want to talk about, with strong prodding by the fake news and the success-starved Dems, is the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Let these weaklings continue forward and do the Democrats' work. Don't even think about talking of our incredible and unprecedented success, because I don't want their support anymore. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again. I mean, it's hard. It's one of those things. Every time I read that, it's so hard for me to imagine what would possibly possess a human being in his position to say something like that. It's almost like he's in a maniacal state. And I don't mean that I'm not like a Trump derangement syndrome. I'm not a hyper liberal anti-Trump person, but it's almost like he's riding this wave of what he's told himself is incredible success. And it's almost like he's actually so out of touch with the base. I don't think that he really understands necessarily the gravity of what he's doing. And I do think as well, he's surrounded by people who are just incapable of being honest with him. And this is what happens when somebody is an egotistical maniac and is handed an enormous amount of power. And not only isn't handed an enormous amount of power, but is given that power for the sole purpose to express the interests of people even more powerful than him. So Trump, not only is he in a maniacal state of thinking that his victories are never ending and that his wins are indefatigable, he's also amped up by this whole system that's behind him that wants him to be successful in whatever it is that he's doing. It's obviously either it seems almost too blatant to be a cover-up, because to do it so willingly and so out in the open, it just seems so unreasonable. And the audacity is almost hard to imagine. It's so interesting to me, the audacity. It's just mind-blowing. And I don't know, I don't know necessarily that his intention is. So let me put it this way. There's a couple ways to look at this. Like, the people who are doing apologetics for Trump are going to say, well, the good thing about this is that Trump is forcing everybody to look at this case, right? It's kind of like all news is, or all press is good press sort of argument, where they're saying because Trump is making such a big deal out of the Jeffrey Epstein case, that will somehow lead to some kind of greater attention on it. Or this, to me, I think is a ridiculous argument, and I think it's just cope, major cope. As much as I understand the desire for it, I think it's ridiculous and it's very stupid. The reality of the situation is that Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison and was convicted and charged with the crime of procuring underage girls for Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking enterprise. Okay. We know from victims directly that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in sex trafficking. We also know, based on 15 to 20 years, almost 2 decades of very sophisticated and in-depth research into the life of Jeffrey Epstein, that he was involved in multiple intelligence agencies, he was involved in blackmail, and he was involved in sex trafficking. So it's so shocking to see this 180-degree turn. And I know that every commentator is going to be saying almost the same thing about this, but the one thing that I want to offer that I think is unique is that it seems to me that the situation with Trump and Epstein goes a lot further that I think even a lot of the people in the right wing that knew about it want to admit. I think Trump did a very good job in underplaying his connection to Epstein, and not even just his connection to Epstein, but his connection to the seedy underworld of blackmail in general. And the reason I'm saying that is because Trump really ground his teeth in the real estate world of New York and New Jersey. And I'm not going to relitigate that whole history, but suffice it to say that one doesn't just become successful in that kind of environment. There are, compromises and implications that are necessary in order for you to be successful there. And we know from specific stories that Donald Trump was involved with people connected to the mafia, casinos, and this kind of stuff. There's a lot of money laundering that goes on. We know for sure, because Donald Trump wrote it himself in his own books, that he was mentored by a fellow named Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was something like a Sorry guys, that mic shuts off automatically sometimes. I'm not sure why. So we know that Roy Cohn was a kind of like a political fixer similar to Jeffrey Epstein on the scene in New York, and he mentored Donald Trump. And so I say all that to say that Donald Trump is obviously not a stranger to the environment and to the functions of that class of people. And so it's very difficult for me to believe that this is really anything other than a cover-up. And I think when you look at the surrounding information, when you look at how the situation has been handled by people like Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, I mean, it's Kash Patel is dating a honeypot looking agent that used to work for Prager University, which is a propaganda front for Israel. And she used to work for Unit 8200. She was literally part of Israeli Secret Service. And she's dating Kash Patel, right? Like, one, you have to understand that the level of deceit and commitment that these people are willing to go through to make sure that this story doesn't get out is incredibly high. The Jeffrey Epstein story is a crack in the facade of the entire structure. If we are allowed to get into that crack and investigate what's behind it, we get a view of the whole thing. And they had all the CDs, they had all the recorded information. Every single victim testified that Jeffrey Epstein was recording people. We know for a fact what happened. We know what was going on. The only reason we're not being allowed to find out is because Donald Trump was implicated in it. And that's really the only reasonable thing. Unless it comes to be true, unless it ends up being true that Donald Trump is somehow doing a miraculous double fake, which is so ridiculous to believe at this point. And in the context of all the other information that we have about Donald Trump, it's just absurd. It's honestly absurd. And so I think what I'm hoping that the right wing, can we just admit that he's a liar? Like, he's lying. He lied about mass deportations. He lied about the war. He lied about giving money. He's going to lie about everything else too. And I just don't really see how MAGA can recover from this, and I mean MAGA in the sense of Donald Trump as the leader of MAGA. I think that the energy of that movement is really going to lose its steam if the Epstein situation doesn't sort itself out. Like, if Donald Trump imagines that the 90% of his base that has been polled to be against his handling of the situation is just going to move on, I just think he's wrong. I think he's wrong about this one. And, maybe he's right and I'm wrong. Because, Trump has been quoted as saying, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters. Like, he really does have these deluded beliefs where he thinks he can get away with this kind of stuff. And, when he goes on TV and he does this apologetic tour to try and tell everybody that they're stupid or they're a weakling if they don't want to give up the Jeffrey Epstein story, it's ridiculous. Like, there's no way that plays. There's no way that plays with anybody on the right wing, except for maybe the 6 or 7% of diehard plan trusters that will literally do anything. If Donald Trump said that aliens landed on the White House lawn and they wanted to fix our nuclear reactors and make them more efficient, like, they would believe that and they would defend it probably on Twitter. And that's the status of the right wing. Only a small percentage though. And so I'm just really tired of getting close to getting the story and then having to deal with this parade of insufferable commentators that don't do anything but say what they're told. They literally get paid to stay on social media all day and tell you what to think about things. That's all they do. They have no other job but to make 200 X posts a day about how, you need to stop worrying about Jeffrey Epstein. We need to worry about mass deportations. Or the frame is always meant to portray anybody who disagrees with Donald Trump as though they're just splitting hairs or stealing votes or, ruining something. And it's just, I'm so tired of it. I'm tired of people like Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. I'm just done. I'm just done with it. I'm totally done with it. And, I've never really been a huge Trump supporter, and especially after I saw the people that were giving him money. If Miriam Adelson gives you $100 million and Elon Musk gives you $270 million and Timothy Mellon gives you $200 million, and then it's like, what, you're going to get elected and then go super based and deport 3 million people a year? It's like, come on, it's so ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous. And it's unfortunate because the right wing is always getting played. And this is what I'm saying to people, and this is what I'm encouraging people to do, is to sit out. If Trump doesn't want your support because you don't want to give up on the Epstein story, then fine. then he doesn't get it. And it's just really that simple. Like Republicans, the GOP, and the right wing, they need to know that they can't just shit down everybody's throat all the time and then get their votes because everybody hates the liberals. It's just like, I'm done with it. It doesn't work. It's not true. They lie. And it's always the right wing that's getting stabbed in the back every single time. And meanwhile, all this is going on. We're going to deport, less than what Obama did this year. And it's just a lie. It's totally a lie. And the base never gets what they ask for. We never do, because we always vote before we get any commitments. And we don't have $300 million to donate to Donald Trump's campaign. So we don't get what we want. Who gets what they want? Silicon Valley, the Jews, and the technocrats. That's who get what they want, because they shelled out $400 million to get him elected. And it's not hard to understand, but it's just a hard pill to swallow. And I'm done with it, And once you understand who Trump is, where he comes from, the history with Roy Cohn, his obvious connection with Jeffrey Epstein, the fact that he ran against Pat Buchanan as basically a jobber in the 90s, and he called Pat Buchanan an anti-Semite and said that he worshipped Hitler, and it's just the whole story just is ridiculous. And once you see it for what it is, it's very obvious what was going on. And it's clear what Trump's appeal was. And people on the left will say that his popularity was motivated by a kind of implicit, like, pro-white Christian nationalist undertone, which is like their ultimate fear. And to some degree that's true. The only thing that's wrong about their analysis is that Trump isn't those things. And even though they fear him for being those things, he actually isn't. He's a lot less right-wing than he portrays himself to be. He's much more of a liberal centrist. And he says that he's Christian. He says, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. I'm not convinced. I'll tell you that. I'm not convinced. But the reality is that the right wing needs to be honest about who Trump is. And it's a tough pill to swallow. But the reality is that the country is on the line. And if we end up with another 3 years of no deportations, we're cooked. Like, we're cooked. And the problem is that if it goes that long and the base doesn't get what it wants, this whole movement becomes much more radical. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the energy that Donald Trump represented, that he called to action, like that vibe that he stuck to and pandered to, that doesn't go away when Trump leaves office. And in fact, if none of those desires are achieved that they portrayed on Donald Trump, that they projected onto his character, if those things don't pan out, they're going to want them more. And if you look throughout history, it's very clear that the way that these political movements begin is somebody steps in, they move the Overton window. They're usually not willing to go as far as the people who come after them. Once that person is out of the scene, there's a power vacuum. The power vacuum is then filled by somebody who's really willing to go the distance, right? And if you look at the political discourse, what that looks like, if you follow it to its logical conclusion, is something like a nationalist, extremely far right, pro-white American government. And, I'm not saying like we're on the verge of some kind of fascist uprising, but I'm saying if you understand the direction of political discourse, it's not hard to see already on the periphery, kind of on the edge of the psychic awareness of politics, these ideas are starting to bubble their way in. And, people like Kanye and, people like Nick Fuentes, those people represent a kind of fringe, but they get the ideas first before they get filtered into the majority of people. And so that filtering is happening. And if Donald Trump is not going to deliver on the desires that the people that really wanted from him, that movement is going to go somewhere else. It's going to get radicalized, and it's going to become much more powerful, both politically and in its ability to appeal to people who haven't joined yet. So you can imagine there were 70 million people that were willing to vote for a convicted felon because he told them they were going to get mass deportations and a border wall. And those people still exist. Just because Donald Trump isn't around anymore, they still want mass deportations and a border wall. And so what I'm saying is that in some sense, we await a Caesar. And if you look at history, the Caesar always shows up. It doesn't take long. And I don't think we're far out. And the question really at this point is whether or not things go peacefully or whether things descend into some type of divisive and violent confrontation. And I think that, you know, the more that time goes on, the closer we get to running the risk of having things really divide in a nasty way. And I don't want to see that happen, but it's one of those things that it's tough to say that that's not what's coming. And so, you know, the idea that Trump is going to deliver on this golden age is just goofy. And what it looks to me now is that, you know, MAGA as such has to die in order for this new movement to emerge. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And I think Trump just sealed the deal with this Jeffrey Epstein stuff. It was such a terrible decision. And it's really unfortunate because even though I wasn't a Trump supporter, you know, not because I'm a liberal, but because I just don't think that he's really right wing. I would have liked to have seen that story get exposed. You know, there's tons of people who I think implicitly supported Trump, if not with our votes, but maybe in the sentiment and the desire to see a new person do something that really brings change to the political system. I mean, I think every side of the political spectrum definitely wants that. Like, we all desire that type of change. It's just, you know, it's unfortunate that we're not going to see it. And so whenever Trump is done with MAGA, the next leader, it must be like, we need to stop voting for people that are not absolutely aligned. You know what I mean? We can't be accepting just minor commitments. We can't be accepting rhetoric and passive language. We need very specific verbal commitments on multiple occasions, fleshed out ideas in the public's eye. We can't be voting for people based on rhetoric anymore. And we need to vote for people that are really aligned. And if they're not present, if they're not available, then we don't vote. And if Trump doesn't want us to vote for him, then we won't. It's just that simple. And I'm encouraging people, pay attention to the way the discourse is going, and don't succumb to the temptation to resort to radicalizing yourself. And I'm not saying don't become more aware in terms of right wing, but I'm saying, you know, don't succumb to the temptation to be hateful, to be spiteful, and you know, don't elevate your race above your faith, you know. And I think there's a real risk when I look at the conversations that are happening on X. The casual level of violent racism is pretty crazy, you know. And I'm a pro-white person. I'm pretty aware of race, but it's just one of those things that makes me nervous when I look at the context of the political environment and the type of rhetoric that we see online. And I know a lot of that is, you know, kind of hyped up and botted and such, but it's one of those things that if you bring those ideas to their logical conclusion and you factor in the idea that MAGA is going to be leaving this power vacuum with a very unsatisfied and burgeoning right wing that is dissident, that is racially aware, that is desperate and angry because they've waited for 10 years for this whole movement to amount to vaporware and just to get stabbed in the back and betrayed by their leader again. I mean, people are going to be unhappy, and they deserve to be unhappy, you know. But I'm just hoping that the conversation can be steered in a direction that leads to real results, but without having the violence. That's just what I'm hoping for. And so, what does this have to do with Israel? So, it's obvious that the effort that's been expended to cover up the Epstein story, you know, just happened to occur, or it's, instead of just saying just happened, let's put it this way. It's very clear that Trump's presidency is influenced by Israel. It's very clear that Jewish billionaires in America completely changed their tune after October 7th, right? So Trump, after October 7th, all of a sudden began to receive an unlimited blessing from Jewish billionaires. People who were publicly never Trumpers, people who were committed to stopping Trump in his first campaign, were now diehard Trump supporters and MAGA cultists. And this switch happened right after October 7th. And so it's very clear that there was a shift in ideology not, well, actually, not a shift in ideology, but a shift in the effort to promulgate a certain ideology through Trump's administration. And arguably that could have been present all the way back. I tend to believe that Trump's political career has been something of a favor to Jewish billionaires that he has business relationships with. We know that Donald Trump took a massive loan when he was about to go bankrupt, and we know that that loan came from a certain bank. And so people can look into that and think what they want about it. But it's very clear that Donald Trump is involved, implicated, used by or helping the Jewish lobby, Netanyahu. He calls Netanyahu the greatest man on earth. A guy who's committing a genocide. It's like kind of hard to hear, but that's what he said. And when the system at large comes together to defend a convicted pedophile and sex trafficker and financial terrorist and mysterious billionaire and intelligence asset, it's usually because both the left and the right of the political spectrum have some sort of skin in the game. It's very clear that Epstein had connections in the liberal camps, in the conservative camps. He knew people from every industry, and Jeffrey Epstein said on multiple occasions that he worked for the CIA and that he worked for Mossad, and that those two things were pretty much the same. And these conversations are out there and the information is available. And so the thing that you have to realize is that the Epstein case and the anti-Zionist case and the growing, I think, political awareness of the influence of the Jewish lobby in America are not unrelated ideas. And the reason I say that is that it's not just because Israel and Mossad were involved in Epstein's blackmail ring. It's not just that, but that does play a part in it. It's because it appears to me that Trump's entire telos, like the telos of his whole campaign, has been something of an Israeli op. It's been basically an Israeli op, and it looks like the odds of this going the other direction are pretty slim. I don't have very much faith that any amount of trying to convince Trump of anything is going to change the fact that he is fully either blackmailed or financially beholden to whoever it is that is dictating these policy decisions. For Donald Trump to go on Truth Social and tell everybody in his base and his supporters that he doesn't want their support anymore if they're not willing to move on from the Jeffrey Epstein story, it's like, come on. People have to think. You have to think. Understand what that means. Understand that all of our politicians have an AIPAC guy. Understand that Jeffrey Epstein was working with Mossad. Understand that Donald Trump is bombing Iran for Netanyahu. Like, all of these things are happening. It's very clear what's going on. And what's going to happen in the future, and this is something that I noticed a few days ago that I wanted to talk about. If you haven't seen it, Nick Fuentes did an interview with Candace Owens, which is pretty interesting. I'm not a huge Candace Owens fan. I think she's all right. I thought the interview was pretty poorly done in all fairness, but it was interesting to hear Nick have a chance to explain his position and to see what he had to say for himself about what he believes and stuff. But what I noticed is that Candace was taking a very similar position uncommon if you've been in the realm of X politics and Twitter, but they're using this term called a real anti-Semite. And I mean, of course, the point is to accuse whoever is being called that name of being a racist towards Jews, right? It's a very convenient term that can reduce a complex and nuanced political idea into, oh, you just hate Jewish people. That's pretty much what it does and what it means. Now, is it true that there are real anti-Semites? Yes, of course. There are people that genuinely hate Jewish people because they're Jewish. I think it's reprehensible. I'm not that way. I think most people who are involved in the kind of awakening to Jewish power and influence in America are not that way either. I think it's very obvious, but what happens is that these companies, or not companies, but organizations like the ADL and different Israeli funded and Jewish influenced organizations that police speech in the West will use these terms to tar and feather people who are critical of Israel, critical of Netanyahu, critical of Zionism, critical of Jews. And the reason I bring it up is because whenever somebody is trying to manipulate your idea, especially about race or about a political ideology, it's always important that they use a framing that presupposes the negativity of your position. And it's important to just always ignore that and make sure that you don't fall into that trap. But let's talk a little bit about what I mean by that. So the reason is this: when somebody says real anti-Semite, or if there's a difference between just, I guess, opposing the political and government decisions of Israel as a nation state and being opposed to Jewish power in America. So the problem is that every Jewish person in the world, if they are Jewish, if they commit to their being Jewish, are part of a diasporic population, which has a presupposed spiritual ideology, and that spiritual ideology commits them to acting in the interests of their nation. Okay, so, and I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying this is the way it is. And now, if you look at the statistics and the data, it's very clear that Jews are one of the most tribalistic and committed tribal people in the world. They look out for each other, they hire each other, they live in ethnic and religious enclaves in cities across the country. They have special laws for their own finances. They have special laws for their own diet. People understand. They're people of the law. We know the whole story. But my point is just to say that no matter where Jews are, they are essentially a nation inside of a nation. All right. And in America, the Jewish population has, whether by nepotism or whether by academic commitments or just being smarter than everybody else, which they often like to say, they have amassed an enormous amount of wealth and influence. And they use that wealth and influence to forward the interests of Israel, not America. Okay? And it's not that hard to understand, but it seems like it needs to be relitigated over and over again until people can really grasp what it is that I'm saying. So what am I not saying? I'm not saying that all Jews are evil. I'm not saying that people should hate Jewish people. I'm not saying that Jews are inherently bad. What I am saying is that a real Jewish person, a person who is Jewish, loves their Judaism, wants to live a Jewish life, is implicitly in the world operating on behalf of the Israeli state. And I'm not saying that just because they have like a choice and they commit to doing it. It's implied in their whole worldview. The telos of their whole religion is committed to them supporting Israel. And so when we're making an attempt to offer a critique about Jewish power in America, it's not necessarily about them being Jewish, but it also is, because they are Jewish. And the reason they do the things they do to forward the interests of Israel is because they're Jewish. And it just becomes so disingenuous when anytime somebody wants to offer a critique about Jewish power, which is not insignificant, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. We're talking about all of the important industries, all of the influential newspapers. It's so baffling to me that people have a hard time understanding this. And the reason that it's important is that America is meant to be a country for Americans. And I know people have a hard time dealing with this, but the reality is that America was created and was designed for a specific group of people. Now, I'm not saying that it was only white people, and I'm not saying that Jews are necessarily excluded from that. But if you have a billionaire Jew who has publicly stated his diehard support for Israel, that all Jews in the world should live and die for Israel, and that the nation state of Israel is the most important thing in the world, and this person is living in America, and this person is influencing American politicians to do things that are harmful to Americans in order to favor the interests of Israel, that can't be allowed. We can't allow that to happen. And we have been allowing it to happen for something like 4 or 5 decades. And so this distinction between somebody just genuinely critiquing Jewish power and somebody who is just a rabid, quote unquote, anti-Semite is important. And it's going to get more important because the issue of Jewish power is going to get more and more in your face, whether or not you want to think about it. It's coming. It's already very popular on X and social media, the places where people can express themselves without censorship more openly. These ideas are being discussed. People are aware of the influence that they have on American politics, and they want it to stop. And I think that the best way to try and think about it, and this is the way that I explain it to people, is that say we had in America Joe Biden's administration, for instance, and I don't single him out because most of them are the same. Joe Biden's administration was almost 60% Jewish. Okay, the Jews make up less than 10% of the American population. They were made up almost 60% of Biden's administration. Now imagine if when Trump got elected and we started to see all the people that he was choosing for his administration, all his cabinet picks, right? And when the cookie finally crumbled and we got the whole list, we're like, we look at the names and we're like, wow, imagine that. It's like almost 70%, 65% of Trump's administration is from Saudi Arabia. And they have a dual citizenship with Saudi Arabia. Wow, they spend a lot of time there. Well, they even have companies in Saudi Arabia that benefit from deals made with the American government. Imagine that. And it's like, if that were the case, every single person on the right wing would be up in arms the next day. It would be very obvious to everyone that Saudi Arabia had and was planning to use it for their own benefit, right? And so unfortunately, we have the same situation happening right now in America with Israel. So for some reason, it's very easy for us to recognize that it's bad to let a presidential administration be 60% Chinese, but for some reason when it's Israel, our greatest ally, it's no problem. And so it's very simple. If you take this position, you're not taking the position because you hate Jews. You're not taking the position because you believe in Nazi propaganda. You're not taking that position because you believe that Gentiles are superior. You're taking that position because you care about your government and because it's logical to desire that you be governed by people that are like you. This is in every country across the world. This is normally the case. It's so beyond comprehension that this is even a discussion or that it's even a problem. But because of the propaganda and because of the amount of money and time and influence that's been spent in influencing your ideas about race, it's almost impossible to talk about. And so I hope that we can, especially the people on the right wing, I hope that we can come to understand the situation for what it is. And I think we need more people to be talking about it openly, and we need more people to be talking about it in a way that's reasonable and not sensational. And I hope that's what we can do. And, in conclusion, I just want to say this. Donald Trump is completely cratering his presidency and his legacy by rejecting this Epstein stuff. He's doing it most likely because he's blackmailed or because he's implicated in some way, whether it be financially, sexually, whatever it is. And for people who are resisting that, I don't think that they'll ever be reached. I don't think anybody who's willing to believe Donald Trump at this point will ever change their mind. And I think what people on the right wing need to do is we need to come together. And we need to recognize that we're looking for someone else. It's not going to be him. I think everybody knew that, but I think everybody needs to also recognize it. It's not going to be Trump. MAGA is going to have to die so that something new can come in its place. And that thing that comes in its place is going to be based. It's going to be much more right wing. And I think that's the hope that we have for the future. And as long as things don't go south, as long as things don't go violent, then ultimately, I think we can look back at Trump as a catalyst for something that was much greater. And no matter what, I think this change is coming. I think it's pretty clear the winds are blowing in this direction. I think the awareness of nationalism, the awareness of just the increasing awareness of race and the pro, European ideologies in the face of all the immigration, these things are coming around the corner. And I think it was Academic Agent said the other day that Joseph Goebbels wrote I think it was only something like 4 years between the time that Goebbels wrote his, I forget what the essay was, but what I'm saying is that once these ideologies take root, it doesn't take long for them to spread and for things to start picking up steam. So I just want to encourage people to be level-headed. I think we do need to be serious about getting Jewish power out of the government, but I think we need to be careful not to allow that energy to run off into something like fascism or not. I mean, I'm not necessarily against historical, not violent fascism, but I think that we have to be careful about about how far we let it go. And I think it's inevitable that it's coming, and the only thing that we can really do is influence the tempo and the vibe of what's coming. And so I think this is a good indicator. Trump's cover-up of Epstein is going to go down in history as the moment that a real shift happened in the right wing. And I just hope that it goes right and it doesn't go wrong. And I appreciate you guys for being here. I hope you have a good night. I hope that was helpful. If you can leave comments, like, subscribe, you guys know all what to do. I hate doing these calls to action, but I really, really appreciate it because it's going to be through sharing that I'm able to get the material out there and have the algorithms, actually share the stuff. So I appreciate you guys. God bless you all. I hope you have a good night, and I'll either be back tomorrow or the